The Biophilic Leadership Summit is the only multi-day conference entirely dedicated to biophilic projects, principles, and research, bringing together the top industry leaders in an intimate, natural setting to network, build partnerships, and learn from each other.
This year's summit will explore biophilic placemaking and how we can use biophilic principles to promote health, happiness, and vitality in public spaces.
In addition to fascinating presentations, delicious farm-to-table meals at Serenbe, and cocktails, this year's summit will feature a selection of biophilic experiences like forest bathing, bird watching, and more.
So join us in Serenbe for the 6th Annual Biophilic Leadership Summit from March 24th to March 26th, 2024.
Learn more about the summit and register today at biophilic.summit.com.
That's biophilic.summit.com. We hope to see you there.
Hi, I'm Monica Olson.
And I'm Jennifer Walsh.
And you're listening to the Biophilic Solutions Podcast, where every other week we sit down with experts and thought leaders across industries in order to explore the innate connection between humans and nature and why we need nature to thrive.
We truly believe that in order to tackle the global environmental problems we're facing, we as humans must reconnect to the natural world and come to a better understanding of how we fit in and how we are so interconnected. So in every episode, we'll interview new guests that help us uncover and highlight nature-based solutions to get us on a path to greater health, tackling climate change, and ultimately getting outside and connecting with nature.
So let's get to today's episode.
Hey, Monica.
Hi, Jennifer.
So, Monica, I want to get right into today's episode because we have such an amazing guest. I can't wait to share the interview with our listeners.
Yeah, this is a really exciting one for us because today we're speaking with Mara Hoffman. And for any of you fashion-forward listeners, I'm sure Mara needs no introduction. However, for anyone who needs a little more context, she's the president and creative director of her own namesake clothing brand, which is known throughout the world for its innovative and creative use of color, shape, and prints.
Yes. And beyond that, in the past 8 years or so, Mara has become renowned for her approach to sustainability, her innovative use of responsible materials, and transparency around the manufacturing process.
Mara is truly a pioneer in the sustainable fashion space, but remains very open and honest about the challenges that she faces from a business perspective on how to implement that responsible change and where there's tons of room for improvement.
Yes. And in addition to her impressive commitments to responsible fashion, Mara has a very personal and inspirational relationship with the natural world. In her design work, she draws so much inspiration from natural forms and femininity, but also finds comfort and solace in spending time in her home in upstate New York, where she feels a special connection to trees.
Yep. So in our interview, we talk about how Mara has shifted her business to a balanced and climate beneficial model and explore why, in order to connect with nature, we all need to slow down.
Mara is also just a really lovely and thoughtful person, so we think you're really going to enjoy hearing from her. So let's get to our interview with Mara Hoffman. Mara, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here too. I love the whole narrative and the intentionality of this. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, just to set that up, we're so appreciative that you wanted to start before we even got on to record. It was just that time to just be, like you just said, intentional. So those deep breaths to really set the stage for what we want to talk about today. So we kind of love that you wanted to do that before we even kicked it off. So we appreciate that.
Of course. Yes, it helps everyone.
Yeah, and I think everybody's been running around, and I heard that there was a miss last night that Mara, you and Jen were supposed to be at the same event at the FIT Gala, and Jen couldn't make it, unfortunately, but how was it?
It was sweet, and, I feel like I haven't been to a student show in so long, and I think it brought up a lot of feelings. The excitement for youth and newness. And then I also, in a really honest way, felt the weight of that as well, of coming into this industry at this particular time and what that asks. And I, thinking back to when I graduated 125 years ago, I graduated from Parsons in 99, and how different the kind of setup was to train and put creatives into this industry. And we weren't talking about sustainability, and we weren't preparing for the world that we are living in right now. And so thinking about the experience of a student now who's trying to enter an industry that is in deep need of transformation, it's a very different thing. So it was interesting to kind of hold both of those while watching a show.
Yeah, I'm sure that must have been, first of all, beautiful to witness these young people coming out, but also, like you just said, there's so much more at stake right now with how do we step into this new space that we have to be very intentional with what we want to create and how we want to create, and how do we do that very mindfully. It's a fine line, I'm sure, in your industry.
Definitely. And also giving kind of this expansive idea that you can just go and create anything you want. Now, the role for any designer, any creator has to be solution-based. So everything has to be in service to, as opposed to in response to like the ego or your aesthetic. You have to be serving something much larger now to kind of make sense.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing observation. When you started out, I think from reading on your background, like you had wanted to do fashion for years since you were a small child. Did you know in high school then, like, when you were younger, maybe it's just an idea along with many other, I wanted to be a truck driver at one point, so like, what is what was that real hook? Was it middle school, high school to kind of launch you into deciding to go to Parsons?
Yeah, I was definitely interested in clothes since a little teeny tiny one. I was making clothes for my mom by 8,
Wow.
I was definitely tapped in early on. And then I think it became a viable option in high school where I was like, oh, this is something I could actually do. And I was never an academic. Like I was never somebody who loved schoolwork or studying or learning things that I wasn't interested in. It's kind of my thing. Like I can't fake it. The way my mind goes, that if I'm not interested, I'm like, meow. And so it was always now it's ADHD, diagnosed as ADHD. But it's like if he's not plugged in, forget about it.
Yeah.
And so school was very much like that for me, but I was always so creative and spent my time in the art department. And luckily, my parents were very also just supportive of a path less taken. I think I'm from Buffalo, New York, so not a lot of people were going to fashion school necessarily.
Sure. After Parsons, did you stay in New York?
Yeah, I started going too. I was really fortunate that I started spending my summers in New York by my sophomore year of high school. I was doing programs so like anything I could get my hands on, like graphic design, intro to fashion, whatever I could do, I was already there. So by like 16. And then as soon as I graduated high school, I moved immediately to New York. And I did spend my sophomore year in Paris. Parsons had a sister school in Paris. So I was able to really start my fashion curriculum in Paris because freshman year, it was always like a foundations year. We were all, no matter what your major was going to be, we were all studying the same kind of theory type. So, yep, I went to Paris and then I came back, and ever since I've been New York. So now I think it's 28 years or 29 years.
Yeah, I don't like looking at the resume, the 20 plus years. I'm like, when do I change it to 30?
Yeah,
I know. Exactly.
Once you came out, you use like incredible colors. For those of our listeners, if go to marahoffman.com right now and go look at the beautiful clothing and the beautiful fabrics and colors. It has a really warm, rich, layered aspect to it. I mean, you have some really fabulous basics too. Like I'm like kind of like always in black and navy, but beautiful dresses, but then also phenomenal color. Was that from the beginning? For me, I kind of came into the brand over probably the past 5 years. I wasn't aware of it when it started. Tell us a little bit about like, what was your original vision, and what you wanted to do as sort of like core foundations for the brand?
The very original vision, everything was handmade. Everything was one of a kind.
Wow.
Studio. So I was hand dyeing. I was doing a lot of textile treatment. I fell in love with batik, which is a form of wax resist that you can create designs on textiles with. And so I spent years in the beginning hand batiking everything I was making. I would use these African ostrich egg shells, which represented fertility and prosperity. And I would take these beads apart and I would hand bead everything that I made. It was really more of an art at that time, but everything was wearable and I was selling those pieces. So that was the beginning. And I spent probably, the first 5 years in that space. It was a family affair. My mother would come, bring things, we'd drag things to the laundromat. Someone would sit there and read a book while the dyes were washing out. We'd sit over a hot pot and pick batik wax out of the seams things with our nails. And what will later become a theme of discomfort becoming the catalyst for transformation, it became really uncomfortable lugging heavy, wet clothes around and constantly having to prepare dyes. And so that the laborious nature of the way I was creating was becoming tiresome. And I was sitting in my soon-to-be husband's backyard with a piece of stretched silk, painting on silk, and I painted these leaves. And I was like, I think this could be a print that I don't actually have to do over and over with my hands. And so that was a huge turning point where I brought this to a company in New York who was printing overseas on silks. And all of a sudden my business changed. And that was probably 2000, I think it was like 2005. And then big expansion point. And then another very big one was 2008 when we launched swim as its own kind of world, which was very definitive again for the brand.
Yeah, no, and that's actually how I came into the brand. Tons of women, friends of mine, all wear the brand, and it's just like the materiality of the fabric is so fantastic, and it's much more than a swim piece, or in my mind of what I thought of swim at that time, that it's just the heft of it and the thickness and the fabric is just so much more. It feels much more luxurious than what you would have thought, your typical like J. Crew bathing suit that you bought in college or whatever. So that's phenomenal. Was that something that had always been that way? I know that you're very specific about the materials that you use, and we can talk about the sustainability of it, but why swim? Why did you go into that? And then had it always been an import that it felt like almost more of a clothing piece than a swimwear?
Right. Well, there was a few things happening. I think during that time when we launched, there really wasn't the market. Like, it was such a different landscape than what we see now and what would soon follow. So many people doing swim. But at the time, it was super limited, like a very missy, as they would call it, like a bit of a mature, more like Go-Tex and things out there. So when we launched, it felt really exciting and new and kind of gave that breath that a lot of people didn't even know they were looking for. Like swim it was sort of like a task before. Finding a bathing suit, and then it became finding a bathing suit.
Yeah, totally.
And it became exciting and fun, and people had a lot of bathing suits, and bought more than one. And before that, and maybe that wasn't a great thing, that it got so exciting that people thought they needed a bunch of them. But thinking before, you probably had one or two bathing suits.
Yeah, it didn't seem like fashion before that.
And then it became a way to express yourself. Like, it wasn't just a utilitarian object that you put on to go swimming and to have less clothes on at the beach. It became a wardrobe. It became a statement. How do you express yourself through your swimwear? And that was great for us because I knew how to do that. And I think on another level, I have been a dancer my whole life, and I grew up deeply connected to body and movement. So for me, swim is this natural extension of that. It's so in relationship to your body and how you move, and it's as close to naked as you're probably going to be in public for most people in their lives. Also, an emotional connection to it. Like, think about even trying on bathing suits, what that does. It can be a really hard and challenging experience, or it can be something that feels liberating and connectedness to whatever parts. Maybe it's sexiness, maybe it's strength or athleticism, or it's a conversation with your body. Understanding myself from this broader perspective, I think being in conversation, even if we get later into this in relationship to the plants and the trees that we'll go to, but this like bringing it back to the body has become so important to me and what that means. So I think swim was just a precursor. I would never have had words for that, but it's particularly around women and our relationship to our bodies and what it means to like claim more ownership of them and forward to how that correlates to the planet and how our bodies are this direct line. So swim would, before understanding it, would be a doorway to that.
That makes so much sense, Mara, that you're saying that, and knowing your clothes for so long and the swim part, and to know that you're a dancer, which I didn't realize you were a dancer, but that makes so much sense because you've always wanted to create feelings for women. Like everything is like stepping into a feeling. And what you create for women is like this positive femininity that's like strength and empowering, but these clothes that are just almost effortless. Like there's an effortlessness to it that you feel like empowered because you're wearing this item of clothing, whether it be the bathing suit or one of your other pieces that, I don't know, there's a strength to it, but there's also this flow that I just feel so beautiful in your clothing that I've had in the past. And now I understand like how you've created because you were a dancer and you understand that form and femininity of how we move in our bodies. And now a little light bulb just went off on my head. Now I get it. Now it makes a lot of sense, that feeling.
Love that.
This is really great because there is a love for the female form, just even looking at the collections, and that wouldn't have been able to put my finger on it either until you had said that. Let's talk about a little bit to the shift to, I think it was 2015, into thinking about what we hopefully all think about today, or at least we're trying to put a little bit of a seed in people's heads to be more thoughtful or push the brands that we're buying to be more thoughtful about how they're manufacturing and the materials that they're putting in. And we believe it's a push-pull. The consumer is a part of it, but the brands have a lot of responsibility. How did that shift happen with the brand in 2015 into a sustainable framework, which I think is your language, which I really like that as a way to think about it?
Well, at the time, the brand was 15 years old. So we definitely, this was not, as obviously as you're saying too, this is not how we started out. It wasn't the original kind of ideation of like what this was meant. And again, when I did begin, there wasn't the conversation of being in the industry for that to become part of dialogue. And for me, I think I started tapping in to, again, this next layer of discomfort. Probably around 2012, I became just the awareness was there. I was like, oh, yeah. All right. There's harm. I'm part of it by existing, by not doing something kind of different, except I had no idea what different meant. It was like this super abstract idea of, I've been doing this thing for all these years and I have this trajectory and it looks like this and where do I even begin to change? Again, we weren't pioneers by any means in this space. Even 9 years ago, there were definitely people who were far along and had been very established in this journey of trying to create with less harm. I think we're all stumble or all like kind of with the word sustainability. Probably you feel the same way, that we're all like in an agreement to use it for the lack of a better word right now, right?
Yep.
The discomfort creeps in around 2012. My son was born, just to give some perspective, in the 2011.
Okay.
And which obviously is an immense transformation for anyone who chooses or does go through that experience. And, something I've been thinking, I've been very connected into, and we can get into this more a little bit, around these ideas around death and how important they are. And like that we experience so many deaths within our life of ourselves, a version of ourselves, and what they are and how we're not trained to celebrate that, and why we have such particular culture, so much pain and so much trouble around death. We're not in the same mindset as we are what we give to birth. We kind of stay away as far as we can from death, but we're constantly existing in it, right? So I give birth, a part of me definitely dies, it has to in order to like birth something else. And that was a huge catalyst because now I'm living for someone else, with someone else, for someone else. And I honestly think probably the biggest catalyst because all of a sudden I'm not alone, full creative ego. And I don't mean ego in a deep shaming way of ego because we all have it and it's actually a really magnificent part of our engine. It just has to work for something greater. Part of the human experience here. Let's have ego. As a creative and somebody contributing, having my kid put me in big check and big discomfort. And so then a couple of years are passing and that's getting louder and stronger and yuckier, right? So like the yuck is so big that I can't talk yuck away at night, manipulative way. It's there to stay. And so 2015, Joaquin is 3 and I'm yucked out. I had no idea really how to transform at this point. And I've told this story a million times, but I go to Dana, who's now my VP of Sustainability and my deep partner in this work of transformation. I go to her house. She at the time is the production director. I sit on her couch. She's on maternity leave and I just start crying. How do we change? Like, what do we do? Do we close? We should close. Let's close the business. Dana, I always have to say it, Capricorn. Mara, we're not closing. We're not closing the business. So from that point, that's when we started to transform. And we started with low-hanging fruit, audits, what was existing for us as a company, what we were comfortable keeping, what we knew needed change, what we had to throw out completely. I think that was like that first audit. And then the very beginning was, the low-hanging fruits of materials, like where we could begin to slowly swap things out. And then the traceability of who we were working with and really deeply knowing at every point who we were working with. Yeah. And then to the internal commitments that began then of what does it mean to change a mindset within your company that you have right here, that you're doing within an office, then obviously that extend out to an entire supply chain, but not to overlook the immediacy of our everyday action.
I love that too, Mara, because it's all about, first of all, accountability, but taking that time to say, okay, we have to start in a new lens. And I think Monica and I talked about this recently of like, we have to give each other grace because I know, Mara, you've said like, we're not sustainable, but we're working towards being as sustainable as possible. So like Monica talked about the framework that you talked about, Mara, but that's giving the grace of people that are trying to do better. And that's where we as women have to support other women who are trying to do better for the planet, better for our families, better for our communities. But I really love that you took that initiative and that Dana helped you on the couch that night to say, yes, we're going to be fine. We just need to
I don't even
reframe.
Fine, like neither of us. We're like,
No, and I think one of the quotes that we pulled during our research was, I think that I'm going to attribute this to you. I think this was from an article you did, is like sustainability is often a luxury, right? To have time to think about that and buy sustainably is a luxury. To have the time to think about it, that's going to be a bother for you. There's so many things that people are worried about. And then, it still does a lot of times cost more to do the right thing, to buy sustainably. And I like that you even said we have to, every day generate awareness, let people have the information so they can make the thoughtful decision. But it really is up to the brands to make the shifts, right? Because the consumers do have power, but sometimes they don't even know, to your point about the swimwear, like what they need. So your leadership, I think, is incredible. But I think also having the courage to say, it's a luxury to think this way. It's a luxury to worry about a sustainable dish brand or a sustainable makeup brand or sustainable clothing. And it's a journey. And we shouldn't be shaming people that they're not doing it, but we should be encouraging them to move forward and think this way.
And those that do have the privilege right now of time and resources to make those decisions, but absolutely to think about how many human beings are simply surviving at this point, and that is Like, how do you get food in your kid's mouth today? How do you make sure there are clothes on their body? So like this, all of this that we're talking about is deeply under the lens of great privilege to be able to think about $600 dresses, right? So like it just obviously to put perspective on it. And it isn't, again, to diminish that or shame that part. It is just a moment of perspective. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think it's super important. So thank you. When you think about where you are today, now 8 years, 9 years into the sustainability framework or journey, perhaps, where do you see some of the biggest successes and biggest challenges that you still have? I mean, obviously it's an ongoing thing, but are there a couple things that sort of stood out that like, oh, I didn't realize I was going to run into this challenge when I had to change materials or transparency or circularity? Like, what are some of the challenges that are in the fashion industry that have come up?
I mean, there are a lot. I think that I feel like there's this like underlining theme of the things that we're talking about around pace and the timing of things. And it's honestly just so deeply reflective of the planetary pain right now, is because we're moving so fast. Everyone's attention span has shrunk to this give me more kind of space. And we're trying to like fill the void for all of us as fast as we can. I think one thing for us is like keeping up with the pace and not, there's such a hunger that at some point, I hope we're brave enough and have enough courage as to like pull out of this race, and myself included and my company included, to like find a way out, or a way that presents a different way of existing and that doesn't have to be at this pace. It's so much. And so we're still answering to that. We're answering to a very old world, an old paradigm still of how quickly we can put things out. That's a problem. Obviously for us, circularity is such a huge goal and such a huge part of how to do this thing right. And so that part is huge, is making sure and finding ways that we have full responsibility at the end of life for the thing. Again, let's back in a beautiful, encompassing way. Like, how do we take care of the end of something? How do we prolong that? And how do we create new beginnings for something and take full responsibility as a brand, not just for the front ending of how to design something in a responsible way, but how to put it back in the earth in a responsible way. So that comes with its own set of issues, finding materials that can be like working in a monofiber where things can be recycled at the end or separated. Very big price. The economics of this is tough. And I don't want to just scream all the hard parts, but being profitable. I'm an independently run company still, and I'm definitely finally open to the idea and the invitation of a different way of doing business. So that would include I'm actually really open to that now. The way we've done it is it's very challenging. And as you can imagine, like then what you hear is supply chains, like everything is just becoming more expensive. So all of those materials that were a bit more attainable before are that much more expensive now. Like thinking the difference between, a conventional cotton to like a got certified organic cotton now to hopefully a recycled cotton or a climate beneficial cotton, everything is just more money. And so to try and stay accessible to that talk around what we were talking about before too, this accessibility of sustainable clothing. It's harder and harder when the materials are so much more expensive. So that's definitely some of our pain points as a company to this, but then just shine a light on how much you still can do. So in no way do I want this to be something that comes off as a discouraging thing, because there's also so much that you can transform in your company, whatever size it is. Like you can be doing better on so many levels, again, by upgrading your fabrics, by caring about the human beings that are part of it, from the people that are in your close, like in your office space, to everyone along the line of your supply chain. There is so much that can be done that's really actually also exciting, that partners with technology and this forward moving, the different areas of science, farming, technology that all contribute to the future of fashion.
The New York store, that was your first store, and still is, I believe, right? A couple of years ago, you opened the New York store. How did that transform the business? Because obviously you have full control over the experience. Obviously your wholesalers are, I'm sure, a huge part of your business. They're all over the country, from Neiman's to Intermix but how you sort of curate and align products that come in. Like I love the ring you have on, which maybe we'll put a link in the show notes. Yes. Because I think there's a freshness to a brand that way, whether that's your travelogue or storytelling, or I think there's more. Obviously, the wholesale point is a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Like there's a demand there. And so you sort of have to fill that demand, as well as it's a phenomenal creative outlet for you. But in your store, you have full control. So you can have a core collection that's year after year and then continue to add on. But tell us a little bit about like the aligned brands that you've brought in, why you chose to do that, and just tell us about the store. I think it's pretty exciting. I worked for Gap for years and years, so I'm a retail girl. Like I love an in-person experience.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'd always wanted to do this. I'd always wanted to do it. It was an easy thing to push off because there's always 1,000 other things to take care of, and bandwidth, and like a store is a huge lift and has a set of demands, deep demands. But I think the real push was after the pandemic, because we had spent this time in such separation from one another. And it felt to me this really important antidote for the separation we had collectively experienced. And I longed for a space that you could actually engage your senses, right? So it isn't just the experience of seeing each other. Like I wanted a place where you could smell things, you could hold fabric to your face. You could be in relationship to it in a dressing room, in communication with other people to help you and support you in the decision of consumption, right? Like that we don't minimize that to this get a bunch of things online and there's this disconnect to it. But what if we brought ritual back? Like what if we brought back humanity to the trying experience of it, right? It changes it. And I needed that for myself. So I figured what I've learned really deeply is the way that I contribute is by listening to my authentic self is always speaking. And now I can trust that if I'm feeling it or needing it, the collective is too in some way. And the older I get, understanding how to work with that. I needed that. And I needed to feel plugged into something. And so the store felt so essential. And I needed a place for a lot of plants to live because I'm a plant person. And you should see my house is so crazy, ridiculous with plants. And the store, I feel is restrained. It would be plants every single corner if I had my way. But I have people that I am doing this with.
That in-store person said no.
We had to sell clothes. It turns out we had to sell clothes, not just smell plant air.
My gosh, I get it.
Right? So the store, and then the objects, the other things, the third party was really, again, just trying to round out the lifestyle of this and what would complement that. And so there's some jewelry in there by some of my best friends. The ring I'm wearing is by one of my best friends, Astrid Schmidt. And then I have jewelry there by Pamela Love, who's another best friend. And a lot of vintage jeans. I'm a huge vintage person. So sort of rounding out what the person would want and trying to offer that there. A few products and oils, and then a lot of found objects that I found in flea markets and different sources. I'm always searching for pottery and pieces like that. So wanted to bring a more sentimental touch to the experience.
Well, it
I
sounds
love it.
super intentional, Mara, because I think I'm a former store owner. So I get like this idea of bringing this, again, the feeling to what you're doing and that
I love that.
storytelling. So you're juggling a lot. So do you find that there's a connection to nature that you're bringing into your spaces a little bit? Because I know that you love trees and you talk to trees and your plants. So do you find that connection soothing to you running a business and like that intentionality?
Huge. I could cry thinking about the job that plants do. I was thinking about
Oh,
this podcast this morning, and I have this beautiful fig that lives in my Brooklyn. I go between upstate and Brooklyn, and so I spend like 4 days a week with the trees. And then I come here 2 or 3 days a week. It depends on my week. And I stay at my house in Brooklyn. And I have this one big fig. And it's the only plant in that house. It's just like a bedroom that I have. And I was talking to it this morning, and I was thinking about us having this conversation. And it is the most extraordinary medicine that we're living with, that we aren't aware of the role that it's playing. Same with the animals. Like, they're doing such a huge job for us right now.
I know.
Or the plants are like the wisdom. They're these wisdom keepers, and they're just here, and they're rooting for us, and they have their own energetic frequency running through them, and their own like kind of guide systems. And they're so generous, and they're really ultimately so available to us. And I think, again, the link to this pace that we're going makes forming that bond, it makes us so impatient with any kind of friendship or moving something into intimacy. Like, if it doesn't feel good right away, it's not worth the time. And the thing about the plants and the trees is that they have so much, but you have to slow down, because they're not going to go at our pace. They're not going to unfurl for us at the pace that we want everything to unfurl for us. So it's this other level of medicine. It's trying to serve us by saying, I'm here for you, but you have to slow down. You have to take a breath. You have to put yourself in a spot of vulnerability by talking to me, which can feel so awkward and so uncomfortable in the beginning of this courtship, right? And for me, I don't even know, I think it just started rolling out that I would start speaking to these beautiful trees on my walk. And then all of a sudden, like, my practice too, part of my practice is listening. And I have this incredible teacher, human form teacher, who has taught me how to listen. And it's listening to the subtle realms of being quiet to listen to nature, and like where you hear movement around you, like a bird is here. There's wind on the right side. There's a leaf that you hear move over on the left, right, and sort of being able to identify sound a little bit different. And the more you practice listening, the more also, again, becomes available to you. And the trees, they're
I know. You're speaking our language, Mara. You are speaking our language.
I know. They're so here for us that it breaks your heart to think how much we're struggling through this thing that we're going through right now. And they are so benevolent, and they want us to work. They want us to succeed. They believe, really do. And there's a dependency that we're experiencing this with. But I think, like, how do we get people to take that first step? And again, I can't have this conversation without, again, bringing in the privilege part of even proximity to nature, right? We take that for granted, that here we are as these people experiencing life on this very particular plane, right? Very particular experience that we're living with so much success, right? Our lives are not about survival. Far from it. That we get proximity, we get access. And what we've created as a culture is really denying that, when it's our birthright as humans to like be in relationship to it. But we've set this structure up, and it's the opposite. It's of keeping people from the medicine. We keep people from medicine left and right.
Yeah. And that's like a whole, probably another conversation podcast about system change.
Sure. 100%.
Is a whole thing. And, you know, at minimum, we've had some really interesting conversations on this podcast, and I'll bring up just one amazing group called the Biophilic Cities Project. a gentleman, Tim Beatley's a professor at UVA. He created it, and his whole goal is bringing nature back into cities and bringing them into neighborhoods that don't have it, because there's so much research and so much information about, if you don't have trees, if you don't have green, there's just negative outcomes all around. And so that's just one example, but that is our mission, is how do we find the solutions? And for us, it's shining light on them. That's sort of what our role is at minimum here, shining light on the solutions, and hopefully they can become policy, or somebody will change something on their city council, or they'll plant edibles in their front lawn instead of front lawns, anything. I want to sort of let people know that, one of the beautiful things that you're doing in the business is you're reclaiming the clothes. You can send back in your gently used Mara Hoffmans and you'll resell them for them. As well as, I was digging into the website, I really liked is because I always wonder, like, how often should I be washing things, right? Besides, something that got truly dirty. And I think you encourage, don't do it that often. Like,
I'm wearing this outfit for days.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a beautiful outfit too.
Yeah. And that saves so many resources. How is that going?
Great. It's a slow grow for sure, but it's a worthy grow and an important one to put our energy into. And I'm excited again, it's always this bandwidth game for us. I'm so excited for a little time and space to really be able to give it even more attention and love. But honestly, I'm so grateful that we have this. It was something that we again had wanted. I think we launched it in 2020, which is so crazy. The stuff that we did in this insane contraction. There was all this expansion happening within an intense contraction. So it was like everything was happening at once. And it's great. Check it out. It's through Recurate and it's called Full Circle. When I first launched the line, I called it Circle by Mara Hoffman. And I just didn't even have my name in it for many years. It was just this lavender circle. Who knew that was sewn in the clothes? And I guess, you always know, I think you're born with the entirety and it just slowly gives itself bit by bit to you as you go through. But, it's like those things where you're like, how did I kind of know that? But it was there. And so now it's really lovely to have that and the acknowledgement of the beginning of it and the acknowledgement of the shape in which we're experiencing things and how to encourage people to move in that way. And that things don't need to be so exacting and finite in their experience of material anything. Yeah. So that we think about it much differently and we think about it as a life that we bring in and what that will be and what our role in stewardship will be of anything, right? And so just taking this deeper level of responsibility for everything that we touch now. So this gives people a tool, I think, to do it a little bit easier.
That's beautiful. Also, that's the way you speak to it, because, everyone in the world wants to hack our way through everything. But like you're saying before, nature's about the slowness, the slowdown, the listening, the real deep listening and understanding of why it's important to slow down, to acknowledge other human beings and the life forms around us is so important. So I know we're really out of time and we're so appreciative for the time that you gave us today, Mara, because you're so beautiful inside and out. We're so thankful for the work that you do and that you're sharing your gifts with us. I'm just so moved by it. So thank you.
We're going to have to do it in person.
Let's do it. And I just appreciation for the theme of the work that you are inviting people to participate in. It means so much to me. Like when Dana gave me this invitation to speak to this and the work that you're doing, I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God for this invitation and for this conversation. And so please keep doing that.
Wow. Thank you for saying yes.
And where can we find you, by the way, before we shut down? Is it everything Mara Hoffman?
Yeah, everything's Mara.
Twitter,
Instagram is Mara Hoffman. I don't think I have Twitter.
Okay. That's okay. That's okay.
TikTok, I'm like trying my hardest. So it's a little bit more of a raw experience, but come on over, please. I need that. But mostly Instagram, and then obviously the site, marahoffman.com. And yeah, come to the store.
And come visit the store. When you're in New York, go visit the store.
Say hi. Say hi to the plants. Smell the clothes.
Yes. Mara, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my God, I love that entire conversation so much. I don't even know where to begin. So I'll let you start.
Yes, I loved it so much as well. You know, it really hit so many sweet spots for me. And one is sort of her creative inspiration from biophilia and connecting with nature, but also real tangible solutions. So I guess I'll start with an interesting point from the first half of the interview where Mara is talking about her inspiration for swimwear being so tied to movement, dancing, and femininity. First of all, I love that, but I also feel this sense of femininity is very connected to her desire to shift to a more eco-conscious model in her business.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Say more about that.
Well, I'm still working out the exact connection in my head, but she said pretty clearly that becoming a mother was a major impetus for stopping to think and slowing down, really looking at her brand's impact on the planet and thinking beyond herself. There's something to that feminine energy and the earth and motherhood and biophilia where that all feels very bound together to me.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that. And I agree. There might be something there that we should keep thinking and exploring. That also made me think about a theme throughout our conversation with Mara about slowing down, removing ourselves from the rat race as much as possible, and really taking that time for restoration. Women especially are very cyclical, so sometimes that retreat is so necessary for us in particular.
Yeah, I really like the way, Mara approaches balance, these big ideas with tangible solutions in her business. Once she realized that the shift was really imperative for her, she took a very logical approach to making big system changes.
Yes, that also struck me because it seemed very methodical. Start with the low-hanging fruit, take a hard look at the materials and business partners, and think about what needs to change, what can stay the same, and what needs to be cut out entirely.
Yeah. And when you're really methodical about it, you don't have to do everything at once. It can be a process. And we always say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Absolutely. So we have so many great resources about Mara in our show notes. So please go check those out.
And we'll talk again soon, Jen.
Bye, Monica.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we would love for you to follow us on your favorite podcast app, give us a 5-star rating, and please leave us a review.
It really goes such a long way towards helping us reach a wider audience and sharing these amazing interviews and solutions with the world.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for following and reviewing the podcast, and we'll be back with another amazing interview in 2 weeks. You're now a part of the Biophilic movement.